Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Koch. I'm a special education service center specialist, and I'm also the host for today's webinar. So thank you for your participation. The agenda for today's webinar is posted on the website. If you haven't had a chance to review it, we have two items on our agenda. First, we're going to have a presentation about the Dyslexia Handbook updates, followed by some updates from Amplio. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to turn it over to Deanna Clemens. Deanna?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. We are doing the first part with the Dyslexia Handbook revisions. I just wanted to let you know that we are, you can put questions in the Q&A function. There are some questions, if there are clarifications of things that are in the presentation, I'll try to answer those as best I can as we're going. The other questions that you drop in are going to be super helpful for the guidance and Q&A documents that we are developing right now to go along with the Dyslexia Handbook. So please feel free to drop your questions in there. We will not have time today for a lot of Q&A at the end because we're going to be covering the content for the handbook presentation and then kicking it over to our second agenda item. So I am going to mostly monitor the Q&A and support my friend and colleague, Michelle Reeves, who is our state coordinator for dyslexia, who's going to walk you through today's presentation.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So in today's webinar, we will be conducting an overview of the 2021 update to the Dyslexia Handbook. The SBOE gave final approval for updates to the Dyslexia Handbook on September 3rd, 2021. Please note that as of that date of this webinar, October 14th, 2021, while the 2021 Dyslexia Handbook has been approved, it is not yet in effect. The updated handbook goes into effect 20 days after filing as adopted with the Texas Register, which will occur in the coming weeks. This webinar is intended to help prepare LEAs for the upcoming changes. Once the handbook goes into effect, it will replace all previous handbooks and guidelines. So before we get into the 2021 Dyslexia Handbook updates, let's take a minute to review the handbook's history. The Dyslexia Handbook has gone through many changes over the years, making it one of the leading dyslexia guidance documents in the country. The guidance within the handbook is critical for guiding screening, identification, and the required instruction for students with dyslexia and related disorders. Today, I will not cover every single text change or language update to the handbook in significant detail, but I will make sure to point out the main updates within each of the 5 chapters, particularly those substantive changes that will likely have implications for practice within the LEA. So Chapter 1, Definitions and Characteristics. There were minimal substantive changes made to this chapter. One of the changes that was made to Chapter 1 was the addition of the paragraph you see on the slide. In Chapter 1, a statement was added to reference evidence-based core reading instruction. School district and open enrollment charter schools must provide for the use of phonics curriculum that uses systematic direct instruction in kindergarten through 3rd grade, must ensure that all kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade teachers attend a Teacher Literacy Achievement Academy, must certify to the agency that they prioritize placement of highly effective teachers in kindergarten through 2nd grade, integrated reading instruments used to diagnose reading development and comprehension to support each student in pre-kindergarten through 3rd grade. The handbook assumes that all students have received strong, systematic reading instruction in Tier 1. This section was added to really emphasize how critical it is that all students, especially those with or at risk for dyslexia and related disorders, receive strong, systematic reading instruction as part of Tier 1 or core instruction. No other substantive changes were made in Chapter 1. The definitions and characteristics of dyslexia remain the same as in the 2018 handbook. Chapter 2, Screening. This chapter of the Dyslexia Handbook first appeared in the 2018 version. The 2021 update has several important changes that we will cover in this next section. Before we get into the specific screening changes in Chapter 2, I want to first point out this paragraph on child find, which now appears in Chapter 2. This text explains the LEA's child find obligation under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. This federal law requires the state to have policies and procedures in place to ensure that every student in the state who needs special education and related services is located, identified, and evaluated. The purpose of the IDEA is to ensure that students with disabilities are offered a free and appropriate public education. Because a student suspected of having dyslexia may be a student with a disability under the IDEA, the child find mandate includes these students. Therefore, when referring and evaluating students suspected of having dyslexia, LEAs must follow procedures for conducting a full, individual, and initial evaluation, FIIE, under the IDEA. While this definition of child find appeared in the 2018 handbook, what is added here is a specific requirement that the referral and identification process for dyslexia is through a full and individual initial evaluation under the IDEA. The change is discussed in more detail in Chapter 3 of the handbook, which I will talk about in a few minutes. Chapter 2 includes updated language on state requirements for screening. It is required by the Texas Education Code 38.003 that all kindergarten and first grade public school students be screened for dyslexia. The implementation of the screening requirement is what the bulk of Chapter 2 is about. However, there is a related state law, TEC 28.006, which requires each school district to administer a reading instrument to all kindergarten, first, and second grade students to diagnose student reading development and comprehension. Note that 28.006 also applies to seventh grade students who did not demonstrate reading proficiency on the sixth grade state reading assessment. As part of the 28.006, the Commissioner has approved 2 reading instruments for use in kindergarten, TextKia and M-Class Texas, and 3 reading instruments available for first grade free of charge, TPRI, Tejas Lay, M-Class Texas, and FastBridge. These reading instruments include the required elements of a dyslexia screener. This allows districts and charter schools to use one of these free approved instruments to satisfy both requirements should they choose to do so. Neither of these requirements, 38.003 or 28.006, are new, but the 2021 handbook update does provide the clarification noted in the last 2 bullets. A significant change in Chapter 2 involves the number of skills that must be included on the dyslexia screener. Again, we are talking about the universal dyslexia screener that is administered to all kindergarten and first grade students, TEC 38.003 requirement from the last slide. Screeners are brief assessments of a skill designed to quickly differentiate students into one of 2 groups: those who require intervention and those who do not. In the 2021 update, the number of required skills that must be included in the dyslexia screening was reduced for both kinder and first grade from the 2018 version. Kindergarten has changed from 8 to 2 required criteria that must be included in the dyslexia screening instrument, and first grade has changed from 10 to 2 criteria that must be included in the dyslexia screening instrument. This change is reflected in Figure 2.2, criteria for English and Spanish screening instruments, kindergarten screening criteria, is letter naming fluency and phonological awareness. First grade criteria is word reading accuracy or fluency and phonological awareness. Again, I want to make the connection that the current reading instruments for kindergarten and grade 1 that have been approved by the commissioner and are made available to districts free of charge include these required elements. Under the section titled Interpretation of Data, there is some added language that you see on this slide. This again iterates the child find requirements under the IDEA, but also emphasizes the importance of providing adequate instruction and intervention to students. A nice reminder that the purpose of screening is to help identify as early as possible the students at risk for dyslexia or other reading difficulties so that targeted intervention can be provided. Figure 2.5, Universal Screening and Data Review for Reading Risk, was updated. I will cover these updates in the next couple of slides. Please notice the small figure 2.5 in the bottom left-hand corner. The highlighted area shows which section I am discussing on each slide. The section on this slide is the box at the top of the chart. This section reviews universal screening for reading and dyslexia as required by TEC 28.006 and 38.003A. Kindergarten students must be administered a reading instrument at the beginning of the year and may be administered a reading instrument at the middle of the year and end of year. Kindergarten students must be screened for dyslexia at the end of the school year. First grade students must be administered a reading instrument at beginning of year and may be administered a reading instrument at middle and end of year. First grade students must be screened for dyslexia not later than January 31st. At the bottom of the box, the first step in the screening process begins with the following question. Does the screener show the student may be at risk for reading difficulties? When answering the question from the previous slide, does the screener show the student may be at risk for reading difficulties? If the answer is no, the student should continue grade level, evidence-based for reading instruction, tier 1. If the answer is yes, then the committee will collect and review quantitative and qualitative data on the student. Notice that the yes box references figures 2.3 and 2.4. Figure 2.3 provides examples of student behaviors that may have been observed during the screening administration. Figure 2.4 provides examples and sources for the additional data collection. Figures 2.3 and 2.4 are unchanged from the 2018 Dyslexia Handbook. After reviewing all of the quantitative and qualitative data on the student, then the team answers the question, does the analysis show that the student exhibits characteristics of dyslexia or other specific learning disabilities? Picking up on the flowchart from the question, does the analysis show that the student exhibits characteristics of dyslexia or other specific learning disabilities? If the answer is no, the student continues grade level, evidence-based for reading instruction, tier 1, and is provided any other appropriate tiered interventions. If the answer is yes, then the next step is to seek parental consent for a full individual initial evaluation, FIIE. If consent is received, then the evaluation is conducted typically within 45 school days, while grade level evidence-based core reading instruction and appropriate tiered interventions are provided. Once the FIIE is completed, the ARD committee will meet to review the results of the evaluation. This is the end of figure 2.5. However, the process picks up with figure 3.8, which I will walk through in the next section. As you may have noticed, if you are familiar with the screening flowchart from the 2018 handbook, you will notice that all of the evaluations for dyslexia or other specific learning disabilities now flow through a single referral pathway or entry point, a full individual evaluation under IDEA. Chapter 3, Procedures for Evaluation and Identification of Students with Dyslexia. This chapter of the handbook has significant changes that I will begin covering right now. This graphic is not in the handbook. It is just an overview of the main change to Chapter 3. The 2018 Dyslexia Handbook outlined 2 separate entry points or pathways for a dyslexia evaluation through 504 or IDEA. The 2018 handbook asked school teams to make decisions about what type of services they believe students may need before conducting an evaluation. This proved to be challenging and in some cases resulted in schools not fulfilling their child find obligations under IDEA. Now the evaluation process starts at the same place with 1 entry point for dyslexia evaluation and FIE under IDEA. Note this is the same process for related disorders, including dysgraphia. This change means that anytime the LEA suspect that the student has dyslexia or a related disorder or may need dyslexia intervention services, the LEA must seek parental consent for a full individual initial evaluation, FIE, under the IDEA. As a reminder, the process for seeking informed parental consent under the IDEA must include proper prior written notice and be accompanied by the notice of procedural safeguards. It is critical that parents and guardians are informed of the procedural protections and rights afforded them and their child under IDEA. In the next couple of slides, I will cover the updated figure 3.8, pathway to the identification and provision of instruction to students with dyslexia. Please notice the small figure 3.8 on the left side of the slide. The highlighted area shows which section I'm discussing on each slide. Box A is really picking up from figure 2.5 on screening. The question should look familiar. Universal screening information is one way to identify students that are at risk. But as we know, in all grades, for a variety of reasons, a student may be suspected at any time of having dyslexia or another specific learning disability. That is represented by the box on the top right. If the student is not suspected of having dyslexia or another specific learning disability, then they would continue with core instruction, shown here with the no. If the answer to the questions regarding risk or suspicion of a disability are yes, then you move to the box in the lower right labeled B. Here, similar to the screening flowchart we looked at in the last section, the team is collecting and reviewing quantitative and qualitative data. The next question is if the analysis of data shows that the student exhibits characteristics of dyslexia or other specific learning disabilities. Starting at the top of the slide, does the analysis show that the student exhibits characteristics of dyslexia or other specific learning disabilities? If the team reviewing and analyzing that data answers no, the student continues grade level evidence-based core reading instruction, tier 1, and the district provides any other appropriate tiered interventions. If the committee answers yes, box C, then the next step is to seek parental consent and conduct a full individual initial evaluation, FIE. The next question is, does the parent give consent for an FIE? Note that when seeking parental consent to conduct the FIE, this needs to be informed consent and include proper prior written notice and be accompanied by the notice of procedural safeguards. It is critical that parents and guardians are informed of the procedural protections and rights afforded them and their child under the IDEA. The next step depends on the answer to the following question. Does the parent give consent for an FIE? Starting at the top of the slide, we are picking up from the question, does the parent give consent for an FIE? Let's start with the yes box on the right, first labeled E. If yes, then you see in the box that the school will conduct the FIE. As a reminder, there is a 45-day timeline for the FIE, except in some specific situations. That FIE provides the information to answer the question, does the student have an IDEA eligible condition such as dyslexia or a related disorder? But what if the parent refused to consent to the FIE? That moves you into the no box on the left labeled D. In that situation, the school should seek parental consent for a Section 504 evaluation. Then the question is, does the parent give consent for the Section 504 evaluation? Please note that even though the state board chose to include an option to allow dyslexia to potentially still be identified through 504 for situations where parents or guardians are unwilling to consent to an evaluation under IDEA, schools may not in any way persuade or encourage parents and guardians to refuse giving consent to conduct an evaluation under IDEA. Schools should work to explain to parents that consenting to an evaluation under IDEA is not the same as consenting to special education services. Make sure they understand that after the evaluation is complete, they will be part of the team that makes the determination about eligibility and services, and that they will always have the right to refuse special education services, even if that is what the school team recommends. A student can never receive special education services without parental consent. So it is important that they understand that the evaluation is an opportunity to gather all the information and data about their child so that they can participate with the rest of the ARD committee in making an informed decision. This slide picks up at the top from the situation shown on the last slide. Let's start with the left side first in box D. As a reminder, the only way to get to box D is if the parent first refuses consent to the evaluation under IDEA. Only then can the LEA seek consent under Section 504. If the parent refuses consent to the 504 evaluation, then the LEA would move to the no box in the middle of the slide and continue providing core instruction and any other appropriate tiered interventions. If, however, the parents consent to the 504 evaluation, then you would move to box F, where an evaluation is conducted under Section 504, and the 504 committee then answers the question if the dyslexia or related disorder substantially limits one or more of life's major activities. Now let's look at box E in the top right corner. The student has been evaluated under IDEA, and the question is, does the student have an IDEA eligible condition such as dyslexia or a related disorder? If the answer is no, then you move into the no box in the middle where the student continues core instruction and any appropriate tiered interventions. If the answer is yes, we move to box G. If the student has an IDEA eligible condition such as dyslexia or a related disorder, then the ARD committee determines if a need for special education services exists. The next question is, does the student require special education because of the identified IDEA eligible condition? One important thing you might notice on this flow chart is that boxes E and G represent the two components or prongs of IDEA eligibility: the presence of the disability condition and the need for specially designed instruction. There is an important paragraph that now appears in Chapter 3 of the 2021 Handbook update that speaks to these two components. I'm going to show you that text on the next slide. This comes directly from the handbook. If through the evaluation process, it is established that the student has the condition of dyslexia as described in Chapter 1, then the student meets the first prong of eligibility under the IDEA, identification of condition. In other words, the identification of dyslexia using the process outlined in this chapter meets the criteria for the condition of specific learning disability in basic reading and/or reading fluency. However, the presence of the disability condition alone is not sufficient to determine if the student is a student with a disability under the IDEA. Eligibility under the IDEA consists of both identification of the condition and a corresponding need for specially designed instruction as a result of the disability. This clarifies that the identification of dyslexia alone using the process outlined in the 2021 Handbook update equate to the condition of specific learning disability in basic reading and/or reading fluency. That is box E on your flowchart. Box G is about educational need. Here again, I have the questions we left off with at the very top of the slide, starting from the top right box with letter G with the question, does the student require special education because of the identified IDEA eligible condition? Remember here, the ARD committee is talking about the second piece or prong for special education eligibility, a need for special education. If the ARD committee answers yes, then the student would be identified as a student who is eligible for special education and an IEP would be developed. If the ARD committee determines that despite having an IDEA eligible condition, in this case dyslexia, that the student does not require special education and then he or she would still be protected as eligible student under Section 504, but not special education. Now let's move to the top left corner. If the Section 504 committee determines that the student's dyslexia or related disorder substantially limits one or more of life's major activities such as learning, reading, writing, or spelling, then you would move to box H. Yes, the student is eligible for Section 504. If the Section 504 committee determines that the student's dyslexia or related disorder does not substantially limit one or more of life's major activities, such as learning, reading, writing, or spelling, then you move to the box labeled no. The student continues grade level, evidence-based core reading instruction, Tier 1, and provide any appropriate tiered interventions. Here's some additional text that appears in Chapter 3. The 2018 Dyslexia Handbook already included a statement and information about a parent's right to request a dyslexia evaluation at any time. When a parent requests an evaluation, the school district is obligated to review the student's data history to determine if there is a reason to suspect the student has a disability. If a disability is suspected, the student needs to be evaluated following the guidelines of Chapter 3. In other words, evaluated under the IDEA, assuming parental consent is obtained. The language you see here is new language that appears in the 2021 Handbook. The language has been added to further explain parents' rights should the school refuse to evaluate, but the parents disagree with the school's decision. The handbook now also contains a link to TEA's dispute resolution page. As you can see here, when a school refuses to evaluate, if the parent disagrees, they have the right to initiate various dispute resolution options, such as mediation, a state complaint, and due process. Parents could also request an independent evaluation or IEE. Parents also maintain the right to request an evaluation under Section 504. Those are the main updates to Chapter 3. The domains and areas to assess for dyslexia remain the same with minimal language updates. Also in Chapter 3, under the section titled Formal Evaluation, there was a new sentence added to the first paragraph, which states, as part of the evaluation when dyslexia is suspected, in addition to the parent and team of qualified professionals required under IDEA, it is recommended that the multidisciplinary evaluation team include members who have specific knowledge regarding the reading process, dyslexia and related disorder, and dyslexia instruction. This additional sentence speaks to the recommendation that multidisciplinary teams include those dyslexia service providers that may have a lot of experience in evaluating for dyslexia, as well with intervention. They can be significant contributors to the evaluation team. Chapter 4, critical evidence-based components of dyslexia instruction. This chapter overall has relatively few changes. The critical evidence-based components of dyslexia instruction have not changed. However, there is some updated language in a few sections that I will point out. In the 2018 Dyslexia Handbook already contained information about standard protocol dyslexia instruction and specially designed instruction. The text that you see underlined on the slides is added text that appears in the 2021 update under the heading Specially Designed Instruction. Note that participation in standard protocol dyslexia instruction must be considered for all students, including those receiving dyslexia instruction under IDEA. Standard protocol dyslexia instruction could be part of the specially designed instruction and services provided to meet the student's needs. Chapter 4 of the handbook contains information about providers of dyslexia instruction. The section of the text that you see here is unchanged from the 2018 handbook. In order to provide effective intervention, school districts are encouraged to employ highly trained individuals to deliver dyslexia instruction. Teachers such as reading specialists, master reading teachers, general education classroom teachers, or special education teachers who provide dyslexia intervention for students are not required to hold a specific license or certification. However, these educators must at a minimum have additional documented dyslexia trained aligned with 19 TAC 74.28C and must deliver the instruction with fidelity. This includes training in critical evidence-based components of dyslexia instruction, such as phonological awareness, sound symbol association, syllabication, orthography, morphology, syntax, reading comprehension, and reading fluency. This paragraph continues on to the next slide, where I will point out some updated language. In addition, they must deliver multisensory instruction that simultaneously uses all learning pathways to the brain, is systematic, cumulative, is explicitly taught, uses diagnostic teaching to automaticity, and includes both analytic and synthetic approaches. A provider of dyslexia instruction does not have to be certified as a special educator when serving a student who also receives special education and related services, if that provider is the most appropriate person to offer dyslexia instruction. So while the updates in Chapter 4 are fairly minimal, there is a specific calling out to the ARD committees that students with an IEP should be considered for participation in standard protocol dyslexia instruction and that the most appropriate person provide dyslexia instruction. Chapter 5, Dysgraphia. Like Chapter 2, this chapter of the Dyslexia Handbook first appeared in the 2018 version. Throughout Chapter 5, one of the main changes was the clarification that the process of identifying dysgraphia will follow child-defined procedures for conducting a full individual initial evaluation, FIE, under the IDEA. These procedural processes require coordination among the teacher, campus, administrators, diagnostician, and other professionals as appropriate when factors such as a student's English language acquisition, previously identified disability, or other special needs are present. In Figure 5.2, areas of evaluation for dysgraphia, spelling was added to the academic skills column. The rest of the figure remains the same as the 2018 version. Figure 5.3 had significant revisions. These revisions are reflected on the slide. Please note that these are revisions that were adopted by SBOE through an amendment at the September 2021 meeting and do not appear in the proposed handbook revisions document. They will appear in the final version. The revisions are as follows. Do the data show the following characteristics and consequences of dysgraphia? Illegible and or inefficient handwriting with variably shaped or poorly formed letters, difficulty with unedited written spelling, low volume of written output, as well as problems with other aspects of written expression. Do these difficulties typically result from a deficit in graphomotor function, hand movements used for writing and or storing and retrieving orthographic codes, letter forms? Are these difficulties unexpected for the student's age in relation to the student's other abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction? The instructional components of the Dysgraphia chapter remain unchanged from the 2018 version. Thank you so much for attending today. I hope this presentation gave you a better idea of the changes that appear in the 2021 Dyslexia Handbook update. Again, at the time of the presentation, October 14th, 2021, the handbook has not yet been posted to the Texas Register and is not in effect yet. However, these changes were adopted by the SBOE and were shared to support school districts in preparing for implementation. For more information or questions, please contact the Division of Special Education at the number or email address on the screen. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate that. And next up on our agenda, we have Amplio, and we're going to turn to Rachel Doherty. Rachel?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rachel Doherty. I'm the Director of Customer Success for Amplio Learning. And I'm going to give an update today on the TEA Amplio Dyslexia Intervention Program. You have to go to the next one, Stephen. Okay. Amplio's intensive digital intervention platform works in tandem with dyslexia professionals to help students accelerate progress. We have a fully digitized multi-sensory curricula, MTA for English and Esperanza for Spanish, that supports in-class, remote, and hybrid intervention. TEA covers the cost of the platform and curriculum training for all Texas LEAs. Our current adoption, an update on that, is that we have 543 LEAs registered to learn more and use the Amplio platform, 1,200 dyslexia interventionists trained and registered, over 300,000 dyslexia activities delivered on the platform, and over 33 million minutes of dyslexia intervention delivered through the Amplio platform. Interventionists are saying that the main thing that kids is having fun and learning, and that it's saving them a lot of time, and it's really powerful to do intervention in Spanish with kids who are bilingual. Is it stuck for you?
No, it's not stuck, Rachel.
Oh, okay. Well, it's stuck for me. So I'll read it off another screen. It's stuck in between things. Okay. So there's 6 steps. There you go. For getting started with the Amplio, number 1 is register your LEA on the Amplio website, and I'll put that link in the chat. To register your interventionist for MTA or Esperanza curriculum training if needed through ESC4, send your list to students, get trained on the platform, and start running sessions. I'm going to put the link right in the chat. There it is. We have a couple new features and platform enhancements, such as reading progress monitoring, video integration, group and classroom management. We enhanced the data visualization in student profile and ability to start and invite students in a session ad hoc. We also added help desk and articles to help support you while using Amplio. The link is in the chat. If you could register your LEA today, we could get started and get you guys up and running. For next week, for a full overview, Steve Reuter will be doing a webinar on October 21st at 2 p.m. That's me.
Thank you, Rachel. And that webinar, if in case you don't know, will be right here, same channel, same time. It's the TEA LEA webinar. So we will be hosting that next week at 2 o'clock. Also, just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. You can check back, same place that you access this webinar, and listen to the recording. And also the slide deck for the updates to the Dyslexia Handbook are already posted, so you can get them there as well. So that ends our webinar for today, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you so much.